In this presentation, we'll consider what it is that linguists mean by the term language. First, take a minute to think about what you mean when you use the word language. What do you mean by it? And what do you mean when you say a person uses bad language? Not meaning curse words, but meaning they don't speak English well, or you say they have bad English versus good English, or bad ASL versus good ASL. And then, what would make it good? Probably what you mean is not exactly what linguists mean, so we need to shift our thinking just a little bit. First of all, we must understand that by the term language, linguists mean either the human ability to use particular languages or the particular languages themselves. On the one hand, humans have this ability to manipulate symbols according to rules to say anything they want to say. That's the general linguistic ability. And we call that language. We say language does this in the brain, or language is stored in the brain. We're talking about this general ability. On the other hand, we talk about the specific examples of this ability and call them languages as well. By that we mean things like ASL, English, Spanish, Mexican Sign Language, Italian Sign Language, or Colombian Sign Language. Now, linguists have noticed that languages have particular features. First of all, there's a infinite number of things that we can say, even though we only have a limited number of elements or symbols that we use. Now, I use the term symbol because it could mean word or sign, and either one of those is a symbol. A sign is a symbol for an idea. A word is also a symbol for an idea. And even though we have lots of signs and lots of words, we don't have an infinite number of signs or an infinite number of words. There are a few thousand signs, facial expressions, and movements that we use, and we combine them together in a way to produce an infinite number of utterances. We can say an infinite number of things. Even though English might have some 600 or 700,000 words, that's still a limited number. But we can combine them in an infinite number of ways to say whatever we want to say. And notice, too, that the rules that we use are arbitrary. They're not like the rules of math or the rules of logic. They don't have to be the way they are. In English, we put adjectives before nouns. So we say the red house. But in Spanish, they put adjectives sometimes after nouns. And so you'll say la casa roja. The word casa meaning house, and then roja meaning red. That's the house red. But depending on which language you're using, you have to use different rules. The rules are arbitrary, and you only know them by socializing with the people who use those rules. So, this complex structure has evolved that can be used to discuss an infinite number of things. So sometimes we use the term language in a way that may or may not be correct. We sometimes exclude things that are languages and include things that aren't. For instance, Morse code is not a language. It is a system of dots, short dots and long dots, that are used to represent letters. But there's only a certain number of things that Morse code can express, a certain number of letters, numbers, punctuation marks that can be expressed with the dots and dashes. Now, if you happen to know English or know Spanish, you can use Morse code to then speak the language that is a real language, but Morse code itself is not. Bee communication, while fascinating, isn't a language. Bees are able to move their bodies in a particular way that shows where nectar is located, how far away nectar can be found, how much nectar is there. But that seems to be all they can say. We certainly don't think that bees are able to say, oh, there was more nectar here yesterday, too bad we came all this way. Or to say, I hope that the nectar will be in the shade because I'm awfully hot. Bees can't say everything that comes to their mind. Therefore, they can't say they can't express an infinite number of ideas. Therefore, it's not language. Unwritten Aboriginal communication is, however, language. Sometimes we think, oh, well, if it's not written down, it's not a real language. But that's not true. Aboriginal languages can be used to express an infinite number of ideas according to an arbitrary system of rules with a limited number of symbols. Therefore, Aboriginal language is, in fact, language, whether it's written or not. In fact, many of the world's languages have never been written down. While spoken language came about thousands or tens of thousands of years ago, actually, written language has only been around for a few thousand years. And that's okay. Humans have been using language before they developed the system of writing. Dolphin communication is another fascinating example of something that seems like it might be language, but probably fails the test. While we know that dolphins can communicate a large number of ideas to one another in a very interesting way, what they're doing doesn't seem to be quite the same as what humans are doing. They don't seem to be using this set of finite terms or symbols according to an arbitrary rule system to express an infinite number of ideas. While it's true that they can probably express thousands of ideas, and while it's true that they have a unique way of expressing ideas that is different from the way humans do it, it doesn't seem like it's the same thing. So linguists are careful to not say that dolphin communication is a language. So as we wrap up our discussion of what languages are, we need to be careful about the term rules, because languages are governed by rules. There are specific patterns of how words and sounds and sentences all go together. But be careful not to think of these rules as the things that you learn in textbooks, because that's not really the rules that linguists are talking about. Think about this. You knew where to put English adjectives, that English adjectives come before nouns, before you ever went to school. You probably learned it when you were about 2 years old, or maybe even 18 months old. You knew that you said the red house and not the house red. And that's okay. The rules that are written in books come after the rules that were first that you learned growing up. It's the rules that you learned growing up, those rules that you learned from simply interacting with English speakers, that linguists are concerned about. As a matter of fact, the rules that make it into books are only a particular set of rules. The rules of language spoken by people who have money and influence. In France, for instance, it's not the language of the peasant that gets written down in the book. Those rules, in fact, aren't interesting to most people. Instead, it's the rules of the language spoken by the elites that gets written down. And the same in English. Maybe even the same in ASL. But linguists don't do that. Linguists are not interested in prescribing how people should talk. That is, linguists aren't interested in saying, oh, you must talk like these people, or you must sign like these people. Instead, we're interested in finding out how you do talk. Let me give you an example. My grandmother speaks a dialect of English that is spoken in southern Georgia and central Florida. In that dialect, if you wish to indicate that a person is doing something in spite of something else, you can use the ing form. So if I said, I asked him to stop, but he kept right on a-walkin'. Or if I said, I thought he was full, but he kept a-eatin'. That a-eatin' and a-walking form is a way of indicating that a person is doing something in spite of something else. Now, those rules aren't written down in grammar books about English unless you're interested in finding a linguistic description of English. Most people aren't. Most people want to speak English like they speak it in Washington, D.C., not like my grandmother speaks it on her back door or back porch. But linguists are interested in these rules. As a matter of fact, the rules of English that are spoken in Washington, D.C. are no more complex and are no more correct than the rules spoken on my grandmother's back porch. It just happens to be that one particular type of language became prestigious, and it became written down in books. The other type of language is equally rule-governed. It's equally complicated. It's equally developed, equally complex. Yet most people aren't interested in that. Linguists are. Linguists are interested in describing what people actually do. Now, it's true that in this course, we're going to tell you how to sign. But remember, we're not telling deaf people how to sign. What we're doing is we're looking at how native users of ASL use the language and telling you that so that you can emulate them. We're not interested in prescribing how deaf people should sign. We're interested in describing how they do sign, regardless of what some book says. We want to know what deaf people actually do so that we can do that, because that's what the language is. The language is not what's written in a textbook. The language is what's in the head of a native user, and those are the rules that we have to get at.